Hello and welcome to today's stream on my channel. We're going to be talking with Lucas Rosler from Contiamo. I'm going to bring him onto the screen in just a moment. Thank you for tuning in. This is probably the third stream that we've done now with OpenFaaS and serverless topics. So without further ado, let's bring on Lucas. Hi, Lucas.
How are you?
Where are you joining us from today?
Today's, Germany, as I've been, since like everyone else, kind of stuck where they're at, but at home. For a short time, I was fortunate enough that we had like a small office and I could bike in, but the rules have gotten strict enough that I'm committed to home.
Working from home, yeah, that's very common at the moment. And I see that you've got, I see a little bit of a t-shirt there. Just want to see that's not an OpenFaaS one. You're not letting the side down, honestly. Hacktoberfest. So I wonder if anyone in the comments has got a Hacktoberfest t-shirt or an OpenFaaS. This is actually the new one in the store, new design that we've put out there, loads of different colors. And yeah, I think I got my t-shirt this year too. And OpenFaaS has been participating in that program for a while. Quite a few people that have got connected through it. So tell us a bit about Postgres. So I think you use it quite a bit at work, or you have done, and what it would mean to sort of dig into the events. What kind of things could people do with that?
Sure. So I guess I've been using Postgres really since I have been programming, because I went from mathematics to web dev pretty quickly. And so what's that, 10-ish years now? And Postgres is a pretty easy choice. If you're in startups, you need a open source database, something that's cheap to deploy. And I guess the two options are Postgres and MySQL. And there's others, of course, but those are the big ones. So if you go to the cloud providers, you're definitely going to find those there. So Postgres is just probably by chance of that's what the team I joined was doing. And then you just stick with tools that you become better and better at. And I find myself on every team that I join being that guy that kind of likes SQL. So I think about it a lot. I kind of keep up with what's going on there. And as far as the events, like the things that naturally come to me are, because I'm in this kind of web dev background, webhooks are an obvious kind of place to start. And depending on what you're doing, I mean, webhooks are about sending external tools to, a notification about, hey, something inside my app has changed. But there's no reason why those have to be completely external. So especially as like these service-oriented architectures, microservices are more popular, depending on who you talk to, then those external things, I mean, they could be your own services that you've written, just saying, hey, this has changed. Here's an update. One of the things I've always kind of dreamed about, developers, a lot of the more front-end focused developers are always like, hey, we want WebSockets, and they just want something to listen to. Like, hey, let me know when something has changed. And so you could probably create kind of just a simple notification channel to your front end, even just saying, here's a endpoint. I won't give you necessarily all the data. Maybe you have privacy, like authorization concerns, but you can at least say, hey, here's an object of this type, and here's the ID, right? So you could do things like this pretty quickly if you could get the change notifications. There's various ways of doing that.
It sounds like there's a lot of different options that could be used there. I just asked the people that are watching in, hey, Mehdi, Vivek, Fabrizio, Technologic, who's using Postgres? And Mehdi replied back, he's still stuck with MySQL. And there's actually a licensing
maybe difference. Not quite fair, right? Because I've seen some cool stuff done with MySQL. So
there's a bit of a licensing difference, though, isn't there, as well, between the two big databases there? And Postgres is licensed MIT, a bit more permissive, and then is MySQL GPL3?
Oh man, I'm not entirely sure.
Somebody will keep us honest.
I've only used it in passing.
I used it
Nothing.
at university, and it's how I learned about relational databases and normal form. And there's a new version of it. There's a MariaDB from some out there as well. And I guess when I first got into it, it was like, okay, stored procedures. When I learned about them, it's like a whole new world opened up to me, and suddenly I was able to write code and functions and really enjoyed it. And then when I went over to Postgres, I thought it would all just work the same, and it was very different. I remember actually doing the blog post on the serverless single page app on OpenFaaS. I don't remember if you remember that on the blog.
Yeah.
And what that one was, I'll paste it for everyone. We had a little leaderboard. Let me see if I can maybe share this up. And to begin with, we were just tracking basic statistics from like GitHub's API. And this example let us go and build something that was a bit more event-driven. So as GitHub was sending events, we were collecting them in a database, then able to show them on a leaderboard. And this is actually still out there, pretty sure. If
still getting redundant?
Yeah, I think it's here on OpenFaaS Cloud. So that's the raw data. I think it's page. And this is probably scaled to 0, so it'll be coming back from dev null. There we are. So I just thought I'd show this since I've got you here. If anybody can see that. But the second biggest complaint for myself
for me.
is Lucas, and then Derek. And then we've opened lots of issues. We've been commenting a lot, as you can see, that level of activity. So that was kind of fun to build, and it reminds me of what you've put together because had something similar. GitHub was sending us events, and we were putting them in a table. Then we had a nice way of sort of querying them and showing people what that data meant. And so that was probably one of the earliest examples. Now your blog is relatively new, isn't it? I think did you redesign this recently?
Yeah, I had so I use Hugo, and they have great templates in their, I guess, Hugo store. But I had this itch to try some HTML and CSS again. So over Christmas, this was my experiment. So I took inspiration from a couple of the templates and tweaked it from there.
Okay. Got a couple more Postgres users there. Now, I'm a big fan of Hugo as well. We've been using it on the Inlet's website. So talk us through, like, what were you sort of aiming to do with this post? What did you want to get out of it?
Sure. One of the things I mentioned in there is really the inspiration. This is something that I've thought about, or it's come up. The team I'm on right now, there's a couple engineers that are always kind of like, oh, we should do more event-driven. We should do more. So it's just a topic that I feel has kind of followed me, not following me, but like it's always kind of in the atmosphere a little bit. And when I've thought about it in the past with Postgres, and what I did here is using something called the wall. This is the write-ahead log. So this is one of the techniques that Postgres uses for its persistence and also for replication. So when people talk about having HA Postgres, usually what that means is shipping the wall or chunks of the wall, or there's different techniques depending on how you're doing it, but basically the wall powers all of that. So that's where all the changes actually live. What kind of inspired me is that you had this release of Faasd and said, oh, by the way, Postgres is available. Like, we can actually integrate this in now. And I had actually a misconception. I thought, oh, if I want access to the wall, I need to be right next to it. So when he said, oh, Faasd is now like, oh, now I know everything's together. And now I said, oh, now it's possible. One of the things I did find out is, well, technically, you don't actually have to be right on the same service or inside of Postgres to access that wall. At least not the technique that that's used here. So that was something I learned But that was kind of inspiration. It's like, oh, I'm there. I'm next to Postgres. That means I can get to the wall. Let's see if we can do something. So it was really just kind of trying something out.
This was one of the first projects you mentioned, wasn't it? Wild to JSON. Yeah. And I think when you sent that to me, I thought, where has this been all my life? Basically, I can get JSON out of the write ahead log. And it also reminds me if there's a project, we often talk about open source within our community and sustainability. There's a project by Ben Johnson, and he's written something to replicate SQLite. And we're talking about blogs, Hugo and Jekyll. I run a Ghost blog. Many of you will have seen that. And with that, I'm using a SQLite file for everything. And so occasionally I do SFTP and get a copy of it. But he's produced this thing that takes the WoW, reads off the top of it, and pushes it to S3 or wherever you like. So there's a couple of places where I've heard about this recently.
Yeah, this Wild to JSON I've heard of in the past as well. I forget how old it is, but it's not exactly, it's not a 1-month-old project or anything like that. And,
how does it work?
But I never really used it because at least, and there's definitely a chance I misread it, but the way I understood this is, and the technique that is shared with what I ended up doing, but just with a different project, is they use what's called the logical replication. And this means that Postgres kind of creates a channel inside of itself to ask for all those changes, not in JSON format. So that's what this does. It creates a logical replication slot. So it behaves like a receiver, as if there was another Postgres on the other end, receiving the changes that need to be run in order to replicate itself. Yeah. And then it just parses them into JSON.
So you almost have to select that back out of the table.
Yeah, so that's what I found, is like that wall to JSON seems to behave like a plugin. So you have to have that on your instance, your Postgres instance. And then you still need another thing to do that select. So that's ultimately why I didn't end up using it, because when I said, okay, I need something that does that, and then I started looking around a little more, and that's when I found this wall listener, which I didn't use directly. I tweaked it a little bit to just polish or make pieces fit a little bit better, or just to debug some stuff. But it kind of behaves the same way Wall to JSON does. It does that select.
Wall listener then is what's this written in Golang?
Yep. So that's the other obvious benefit, because the last 4 or 5 years have been all Go, and we use a lot of Go in OpenFaaS. Yeah. So it was very natural for me to look at this and say, oh, well, I forget what I needed to just debug 1 or 2 things, and then I wanted to tweak the way that it behaves with nats. So this tool here, Wall Listener, and the version that I hacked on, what it does is actually sits there between your Postgres and a nats server and publishes to a nats topic. And the original version of this would post to a topic based on the schema and the table name.
So this is the schema here, is it?
Yeah.
And is that what we would potentially get then? So you've got nats deployed, and then somehow this connects in and will publish those events onto a nats topic.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. But so one of the tweaks I made is, instead of going to very different topics, I go to a single topic. So for demonstration purposes, it's a little bit simpler than needing to know your entire schema and binding functions, because I wanted an OpenFaaS function to read all of the events. But if I need to know all of the tables, because each table becomes a new topic, then that becomes a little bit
tricky. You weren't put off at all. You just were like, yep, I know Go.
Yeah, exactly.
And did you also make it multi-arch? Your version of it?
Not yet, I don't think. Yeah.
Maybe might be the next thing you do.
Yeah.
And I just asked everybody, is there any gophers? And we've got one person knows a little. I can't remember everybody's aliases, who you are. I'm not sure if Technologic is Matty from Gitia, or if I'm getting mixed up. And I know there's a few of you here that have contributed to OpenFaaS, so we definitely got some other gophers in the house. So you did that. And we also talk about the NATS connector. Now, this is something that we have NATS in two places in OpenFaaS. Let's just open the docs here. We've got some stack picture.
I mean, the first obvious place is OpenFaaS comes with async support out of the box, and that's powered by NATS.
Yeah. So if anybody's ever deployed a function, it normally just looks like this. And then the only thing you need to do to make it async, you just change the prefix of the URL. And the way that works, somebody asked about this recently. So we take the message, we enqueue it to NATS, and then that's it, we're done. Right? You call it immediately back. And if you want, you can have a callback URL. You don't have to have it. And then a queue worker will pick up those messages and fire them off. And so tell us how the NATS connect is different. I wonder if we've got an image in this one or not. No, we don't. How's this one different?
This one's a little bit different because I guess it abstracts the pattern. At least to me, it feels like it's taking the same pattern, but it makes it more abstract because it's not depending on the HTTP request to like figure out, oh, I need to put this into a queue and then go to a function. So instead, the NATS connector knows how to, you have a NATS on one side and you have functions on the other side, and it behaves like that glue. It looks at your NATS, says, oh, there's a topic, subscribes to specific topics, and then knows that there are those functions waiting for those topics. And that's all done by annotations on the function.
Diagram. Here we are. This is what you were talking about.
Yeah.
And this SDK was built because we didn't really know how to do events in OpenFaaS and what people were going to want. So I think I put this together originally for Kafka. And the idea was, just like Lucas is saying, you have each function will have an annotation that says, these are the topics I want, cart.checkout, for instance. And then as an event comes from some source, this one component would then invoke the function as required. And so with the async, you don't really get this. It's just one place, things go in, they come out, they get run. But with what Lucas has done, you effectively are using one NATS topic then for all of your WoW messages.
Yeah.
And then they contain the database name as well in the schema. Yeah. And so then that fires off to the function, which is good. Okay. So you talk about deploying multipass. And we also, it looks like I was right there. Yeah, get here. It's yes, we know you right, Go. You're very good at Go.
I think if we go back to that leaderboard, you find his name on there.
Yeah, we should see. Half. Well, I think we can do one better than that. It was last year that it's got up on the OpenFaaS team page. There you are, with your nice blue OpenFaaS t-shirt. And Medi's looking to get back into it again. Well, let us know. We always need people to sort of give us a hand, even if it is just testing out the examples in a new post. So Faasd then, what's the core difference between that and just going to Kubernetes with OpenFaaS?
Well, I'll start with the main similarity, especially in upcoming Kubernetes, is at the core, they're both using containerd, right? So the very fundamental technology is the same, but Kubernetes brings, it has etcd, and it has this control operator pattern that it's basically the first example of. So it brings that API and connecting multiple different nodes together. And Faasd is meant to be a much more slim version of that, running on a single node, just using containerd with a very, I would say, a much smaller, simpler, but still powerful API for that containerd. So
they effectively match, don't they? So when you do deploy to Faasd, it's the same as doing it to OpenFaaS and Kubernetes. No. The connectors go in a little bit differently to how they do otherwise. How did you find deploying the WoW listener to Faasd versus having to do it? I imagine you'd have had to create a Helm chart and a repo and all sorts for Kubernetes.
In art for Faasd, we actually I think so let me back up. So we had Fast Swarm for a while that kind of sat in the same place as being this smaller alternative. And so we were kind of used to like this Docker Compose format. And then with Faasd, I guess recently in the last, let's say 6 months, Docker Compose became its own kind of spec, independent from Docker itself. And so that's something that we've adopted, which means that if you're comfortable with Docker Compose, then you're probably mostly comfortable. There's some limitations still. It's not a full Docker Compose implementation. But if you've added or created a Compose file and added a service to it, then it's really simple. And we use Docker Compose at work for our local dev in Kubernetes for the deployment. So kind of thinking of both of those is something I do pretty frequently.
Yeah.
And I thought it was pretty simple to add this.
We got 16 people on the live stream now, which is great. I'm sure we'll have other people watching afterwards. If you use Docker Compose, hopefully you find this quite easy to add. Now, the first thing you've done is you've added Postgres, and that's in my new ebook as well that sort of talks about how to get all of that set up. So we won't go into that in too much detail. You got one customization there, though. What's that one?
Yeah, and this is that one. I think there's some other ways of doing it, but this was the one that just worked most consistently.
Yeah.
So if you're operations Postgres expert, maybe they have better ideas like passing as flags or env somehow. There's really two settings
right at the end of this.
Yeah, and this is just the default file, and I just tweaked like the 2 lines. So one of them is,
which line am I looking for?
I think if you look for logical, if you do a search on that,
yeah,
that's one I had to tweak, or that I specifically came in to tweak. And I think there was one other setting that's how many. I'd have to look again through the whole file. Okay. But there's like another like a maximum number. Like there's a number of like slots, I think.
And then we got the well listener again, and then you've overrode its configuration. Because in OpenFaaS, with all of our functions, you'll notice that we're not mounting files. We're trying to drive everything with this 12-factor app approach of it's either a secret that's a file for confidential data. If it's non-confidential, it's an environment variable. So then when you have a file to mount in, it's slightly more work, but not too bad with this compared to Kubernetes. And then,
I mean, in this case, part of this is coming from that I started with Wall Listener, and it had this file format first. I think it's using Viper, but I don't think the Viper if you're familiar with Go's, one of the packages is Viper for configuration management.
Oh, Viper, yeah, yeah.
And so it can bind to environment variables, to flags, to files, and I think it just was set up with files to start with. So I kept it my modifications pretty light.
So we got insert, update, and delete. Those are the things that we care about. We've got,
and here it's specifically on the users table. So I think if you remove this, then you just get everything that happens.
Okay.
But for this demo, I was like, hey, I know I'm going to write a users table. I'm going to put that in there. It allows you potentially to, because this little wall listener is not very heavy. It's a very small thing. You could have different listeners pushing to different topics, depending on which, like maybe one thing is public and something's private. You can have different things happening there.
And then we've got the host for Postgres, we've got the port, and then Nats again, because these are components that, if I've still got it open here, are just part of the file. So then we have your well listener. We've got depends on, which we're using to get the order right. And then the connector, which is the one that we just touched on earlier. And it's saying what topic it wants to listen for. So if you did have your multiple versions of that well listener, we could have one connector per topic or one connector that listens to multiples. And again, we've got the depends on order there. It has a secret for the OpenFaaS gateway so that it can list the functions and find out what topics go where. We then got all of the standard bits and pieces that we would get anyway. And we've got Nats as well.
Yeah, so, and here I'm not adding a separate Nats. I'm definitely piggybacking on the Nats that OpenFaaS already has.
So
depending on if you were to actually go to build a real app on top of this, you may or may not want those to be separate.
So then you go ahead, you install it, you go and you deploying a sample function. What language is that one written in?
I think that one's also in Go.
In Go.
Yeah, okay. And this is where part of the reason why I had to change the wall listener is I remember a while back we kind of formalized that NATS connector, and they updated their package, their library. So NATS, what was it? It went from Stan. The name of the package was Stan, but now they have a package called NATS, and Stan is of course just NATS backwards.
Okay, I didn't know that. I did wonder what Stan came from.
But yeah, so now there's an official like NATS package called NATS, and so I had to make that change before everything really came together.
So if people want to know like how to play with Go and with NATS, go and have a look at the NATS connector and the OpenFaaS org. And
then we have the just a shout out there because we have the connector. This function that I use is the sample function. We have a read and a write sample function.
Okay.
We're just like testing the connector, and that's what this thing is. So here I didn't create a brand new function for it. I just wanted to prove that it could all work. And in that NATS connector repo, you can find these test functions, which are write or publish a message, you have a receive a message, and of course the connector itself. And they're all various difficulty, right? So like the publish a message is very straightforward. Same for receive a message. So depending on what you're looking for, you can kind of find a bit of everything in that packet, in that
just
project.
Echoing it back at this point.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess we should build ourselves up for a demo soon. Would you like to take over?
Sure.
Where we are?
Do a little prayer to the demo gods. See how this goes. So let's see. I need entire window, I believe. And so you're probably seeing yourself, and now a nice empty terminal.
So get you on there. Okay, go for it.
So this is actually inside of a multipass. It's an Ubuntu Faasd. I created one just before this, and I installed. I think I double checked the Git was there, and then I installed make, and I installed Faasd. So I think if I type history, we can see some of that. Yeah. So I just follow the basic instructions from the Faasd using the install script. Double check that everything is working. So let's see. Shouldn't be anything there yet. What is it? Store, deploy. Make sure everything's up and running and happy. There we go. So this, if you are using OpenFaaS, there we go. You've probably done something similar before. But the magic that we want to do, and hopefully I can remember my keyboard shortcut. I've been swapping between Linux and Mac a lot recently. So
that is annoying. Yeah. Command and control and the copying and everything. Yeah.
So here I have Faasd, which I use for the install. And then if I go on OpenFaaS wall listener, you said that you had one small problem with Postgres, but I never got a confirmation from you when you did this. I think I missed a step. So was it just adding that directory?
Yeah. So if you have the ebook, you could open it up and find your way to it. It's got all the chmods and mkdirs and everything you need.
I don't think I have it on this laptop, but
okay.
If I go in here, the folder I need is...
Yeah, so basically all of the ones that we mount are put into a relative directory. And, Chris, it sounds like you need to have another go with multipass. I'm not sure what it was like a few years ago. I only really recently found out about it myself. And
so let's see. I need
Mehdi still deploying Swarm. Oh dear. Wow.
So let's do this.
You can't win all of them.
I like to write make files.
Yes, I noticed that.
Maybe like isn't quite the right word, but I like having my notes kind of in scripts somewhere. So this gets me pretty far. But the thing that was, this is where my keys are. Ooh, this won't work on. This is the part I don't remember the password on multipass.
Yeah, you just have to find it. What I tend to find, thanks for that, Sav, is that I ls it in Faasd, and then it's in secrets.
So I know I need a folder in here.
Password, right? What you're looking for?
I'm trying to get to. I need to create a folder in here, right? So in my
the
Docker
easiest way is to sudo I it, because the permissions are set up so that you're not meant to really see what's going on.
Sudo I it.
Yeah, to get a root shell, and then you can cd in the folder.
There we go.
Yeah. So then I go into varlib Faasd, and I just kind of do what I need to do in there. So what we found out, and you and I were chatting about this probably late on a Sunday night as we do, is that the containers with Docker and Containerd, you have to be the same user on the host as in the container to mount a volume. And so you need your data, unless it's called PG data.
I'm
going to see if I've got my
PG data. Yep.
ebook up on my side.
Oh.
Okay, I tell you, I can give this to you on Slack. Probably just going to be easier if you still got it open. This would be like the cheat sheet, basically. You can copy and paste all of that in.
Okay, so that should, I think that now we have it.
One of them.
I don't know where my Slack is anymore.
There we are.
Yeah. I needed both of these.
It's PG data. We want one for run, and that's all the lock files. So if you run those commands as sudo -i, it would just be easier to paste in.
Why won't it? There we go.
Yeah.
I think.
And then have you got the run?
And it does now.
PG data, and then you want.
So both of those are there. I'll show you in a second. This is the part that I was following your book, and then I didn't write down my little script. So that's where it kind of
yours was slightly different. So if anybody follows a blog post, Luke's, this one might be slightly different with the names and mounts. But
I'll add these in a moment to the repo. So that
I'm looking at your side of things. You have got PG data and you've got run, so you've got that. Now you need to CHO in them as 1000.
Yeah.
And you'll need sudo for that. And you can just do the Postgres folder. Who knows? Is it Postgres or PostgreSQL? How are you actually meant to say that project? It's spelled both ways everywhere.
I need it to be
capital R for that as well.
Yeah. Like this, I think.
And then 1000 on the other side as well.
Yeah. I've seen notation before where like other side's empty, but yeah. So I think that gives us everything. And
okay, what else is there to do? That's
too much.
Creating the directories that you're going to mount. You're not using a token like we use in a book. You're using hard-coded. You've CH-owned it. So now run the daemon reload and restart Faasd.
Yeah. So I put that inside of, so I have a make restart for that as well, which will restart both of those. And then
Yeah, the provider, you don't really need to restart for this.
I think you're definitely, I'm pretty sure you're right, because you wrote it. But I've had, I think a long time ago, issues where it didn't quite behave. I'm overly cautious.
Okay, so we've got a little bit of a problem. What's gone wrong there? You might have to Control-C it before you get it restart again.
Yeah. Try this again.
Is that conf file there? Okay.
I think I know. Oh, that's not what I wanted.
Perhaps, I don't think you had the conf file because we just created that folder. So now you just copied it in, didn't you? What's your local folder? PostgresQL or Postgres?
Ran this just yesterday.
Say we still, the jury is still out. Is it Postgres or PostgresQL? What should it be, guys?
PostgreSQL. One more for the mix.
So let's have a look at your one. Right, so you've got that. That's what we're expecting. And then, so what do you actually have in varlib?
I think this will help there. That's where that file was.
Oh, okay. So you've got both of them.
Yeah.
You have to show both of them then. Actually, I have this up on mine as well. From earlier, I was able to get this working, and I didn't have to change anything. Anything really. Chris is saying it's up to you. Apart from Chris, if it's in a blog post and it's a file name, and you really got to keep an eye on it then. But yeah, seems like a kubectl. You decide. Right. So, have you got a varlib Faasd PostgreSQL Postgres conf? That's my question for you.
Yes.
You sudo ls.
So inside the Postgres, but
with QL, I think, if you look at the message there.
I'm saying I can't mount.
Yeah, because you have Postgres folder, not PostgreSQL.
Sources Postgres. There we go. I probably forgot to.
I think you have a little mismatch on there.
I think this one's going to work. It did work.
Okay.
The problem is if you made a change, you need to make sure you copy it back. So I made a small change to the Docker Compose, but didn't reinstall it.
All right, show us what you got then.
Okay, so we have that. What else did I say in my README? So the next step, of course, is we need this installation. We need to add a function that's going to receive all these messages. Okay. So in the install, in the restart, what we've done is we have Faasd running. So we have a place to put functions. We have a Postgres running, and we have the wall listener running. Yeah. So we have all kind of the pieces there, but we don't have any function to respond when that happens. So if I grab that, and
this is, if anyone's not seen it yet, this is the other way of deploying functions, is if you already know the name of the Docker container and everything else, you can just do it on one line, or you can use a stack YAML.
Yeah, for simple debug functions, I like deploying it like this, just because it's easy to say, like in a blog post, or to give to someone over Slack, or any of these, where it's like, here's one line that you need.
Okay.
So this should deploy.
I was on mute earlier, but what I was trying to say was that in Faasd, the deployments are synchronous. So if you've ever deployed in a UI, I don't know who's seen this, and you're like, did I click that or not? What's actually happening is we haven't got in there yet to put the animation in the UI, but it's synchronous instead of async because there's not a cluster. We don't have to find out what node it's going on. We just simply download the image while you wait, and that's what we just had there.
And I guess if we wanted, we could do the same thing. We could create a publish event just to, let's see if I remember. Let's see if this is correct.
Why don't we do that if we get time after we've fired off some SQL?
So now that that's all there, we have database, we have the listener, we have the function to receive. So the last thing in my
your tutorial
file,
you had like a test message, but I think we should go straight to this one.
Yeah. So here, all I've done is I created something that will log into the Postgres and then just run some initial SQL. It'll create the users table for us, insert a couple, or upsert a couple rows. And then what we should see, if everything's good, is that our function receives, I said 4 rows, we should get 4 messages inside of the function. So here, if I do make, what did I say it was? InitDB.
So let's get our fingers crossed for you here.
I didn't install Postgres T-SQL.
This is what I ran into as well. It's easy fix.
Postgres
client.
It helps if I spell correctly.
It might be Postgres SQL. Man, I wish they could decide what they want to call that project. Everyone's holding their fingers.
Now that that is there, and
okay,
there we go. So in this case,
you just typed the password in.
Yes, I typed the password in
the blog.
No, it's not explicitly stated there. But the password in this case is just because it's simplifies any sort of like debugging. It's this super secret value, super secret. So I typed that in. And what you can see here is it added extension because I like to use UIDs instead of integers. And I created a table, added index because I wanted to ensure uniqueness so that I could do my upsert. And then we have John Wick, James Bond, Elam Garrick, and Sarah Walker all as users of our supposed app. And now if I do fastCLI logs.
If you can push that up to the top of the terminal, then I'll put this message on.
Spell it correctly.
So I think John Wick is on Netflix. I haven't caught up with that one yet.
I think we haven't seen the last one. We've seen the first 2. And I don't think the last one is there.
Okay.
So something did not happen. So
how about getting the logs of the WoW listener? Maybe the logs of the connector as well.
Journal, CTL. How do I list? Should be.
What do you want the logs for something?
Yeah. Should just be wall listener.
Yep, and then the connect. You can look at the connector as well. So journal, CTL, and then you want a T.
Do I need sudo on that?
Possibly. And then OpenFaaS : while-listener. There we are. Okay. Couldn't dial the DB, but what time was that? That was 6 minutes ago. Interesting. What else have we got in there? NATS connector, any output on there? How's that looking? Go down to the bottom. We've got lots of little pings going on. Capital G takes you to the bottom. And, oh, interesting. I wonder if that's all out of OpenFaaS. Cluster pings.
Well, I'm not doing anything though, because there's payloads here.
Okay. So it looks like you're very close to getting it working, but the WoW listener's upset. So the typical thing from the IT crowd, if anybody can you remember what it was on the IT crowd?
Turn it off and turn it on again.
Right.
Let's see. We did discuss this, that there was a problem connecting, but the order was the main culprit. So in that Docker compose file, that's why. See if I can make a.
If you can't get this working now, I'll switch over and show people that that it works on mine, at least a little bit earlier. Okay, so
here we go. So this is connected. Now. So it was probably just a hiccup.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll let you off for a hiccup. So can you do your DB insert again?
Cool. This time. Look at this. Received wall message. And you can see it acknowledging the message. You can see it. So now.
It's did something with Mongo. Was this with Mongo? It worked. Right. Let's see your connector. And it's just connector you called it. You didn't call it NATS connector. That threw me off. We're getting more prayers here from Kosi.
So the NATS connector, I mean, here you can see it received the message.
Oh, we got the message. And
yeah, the wall listener is doing something.
Sample app receive event got the message.
Yeah.
Worked. Well done.
Wonder if there is just a hiccup here with just the order in which things are starting.
Let's take a look. And you know, if this gets a bit technical for folks, this can all be done on Kubernetes as well. Is that exactly how you spelt your function? You've not done I. You've done I before E, but not after C. That's
oh man.
And our logs thing doesn't tell you. Perhaps we could get our logs to say, "Oh, that doesn't exist."
You know, that's a mistake I make all the time with receive. I should just learn my lesson and not use receive as a name.
I before E, but not after C. That's where you got to memorize. So here we go. We've got
except for all those exceptions. Yeah.
We've got the data. So have we got John Wick in there?
Yeah, you can see it started with Wick, and then James Bond, Garrick, and Walker. And that, I think if you come up, you can see the same order that it produced here.
That's awesome.
And the way that I designed it is every time I run this, so if I stop, you can just keep running it because it's doing an upsert.
Okay.
And it should only change the update at that time. It should be fresh, and then we can look at the logs. We get some fresh events here. 1550, which is it's off by one because I'm in German.
Yeah, that's now. Okay. So given that we've got JSON, that's nice and easy to work with programmatic. What's your next step? We want to do something with that in the function. What would I do as a developer?
So at this point, there's a couple options. So either you're writing an app where maybe it's private, and this data, one of the things you should notice is it is pretty, I'll say verbose. It's not, you know, it has the email in here, it has the name, it has all those values that I inserted. So if you had values that you didn't want necessarily published somewhere, but you're building an app internally, so it's okay for it to see all this. Maybe it just responds to this event directly and does something. Maybe mutates the data and shoves it in another table somewhere. Maybe this triggers a welcome email. these sort of things. So you could build something directly on this event. You could also use this as kind of like a like a pub sub, right? So you have something that receives the raw event, and then it can turn around and make more new events that are, say, appropriate to share as like a webhook or something with an external team.
So just to put the case in point, we know that your schema looks roughly like, grab it again.
Yeah, if I think
this. I'm just sharing my screen at the moment if you're confused what just happened. That's what we're looking at. And so I can, if I get the body in, event.body in the node template, I can go p.action if it's an update on a user record. Let's say, let's say it was a user record, and then p.data. Let's say there was an effective date, which is, so we ended a customer's SaaS integration with us. The effective date is less than or equal to, I don't know, get date, something like that.
But we don't have effective date.
We don't have it yet, but we could add it. We're doing imaginary programming here, and then what I could do is, like you say, is some sort of SDK, AWS SES dot send email, leaving us template.html, and then pass in the p.data.email into that, perhaps. And this is pretty similar to something that I put together for people that bought my new ebook, Serverless for Everyone Else, all about Faasd, and I ran an offer. It's still there for a couple more days. If you bought the book on the $50 tier, I'd email you the video for free. And I built it with Faasd. I get the webhook to my Raspberry Pi. Once I've got the webhook, I then look at the dollar amount and forward it onto an email function that uses AWS SES. So I pay $0.12 per goodness knows how many emails. They get fired off. People get their emails. It's all good. And it looks a lot like this. So what I could do is take those pings from Gumroad, put them into a database table instead, and forget about them. And then the while listener could be triggering the function to email people. And if there's some way, I don't think it exists yet, but of upgrading the amount that you're paying for a book, we could then potentially like email you, say thank you for upgrading. And if you look back on the channel not that long ago, I spoke to David McKay, and what he was doing was he had this headless CMS, and this is pretty similar. We can turn a database into a CMS with an API. So one function to get stuff, another function to put records, but then webhooks to fire off other functions when different stuff happens.
Yeah.
We're going to schedule another live stream next week, probably. Okay, well, we'll insert it with one function. That might trigger another one to go to YouTube, publish the link. We might use Banner Bear to get an image for that, or the OpenFaaS equivalent. Update the image to see who's going to be on there. So yeah, this is kind of where it would be next. I don't know what ideas people have got in the chat. We still have quite a few people watching, 18 now. Did you have any ideas of what you might try this with, Lucas? And do you think it's ready to actually try with real stuff?
I think, when you look at all the pieces that are there, so the only thing that's kind of new and young is this wall listener. And it, frankly, is not very complicated. So most of the pieces, people trust NATs. People trust Postgres. So if you have these things sitting around, or maybe not sitting, but being used, then you could definitely take wall listener if it fits your use case. There are definitely some rough edges, maybe you could say, that would make it fit a little better with like the configuration. Or you might have to think a little bit more about, okay, which table filters or which events. So I mean, these are things you have to think about anytime you design something that's kind of event driven. Which events do I want to respond to and listen to? And
Deduplication.
yeah, deduplication. So like
one of the things you might want to do, Cassiano said here, having something like this would have helped me some years ago, being able to put CDN cache in front of something. The cache would then invalidate when records are changed. I actually heard from an OpenFaaS company using OpenFaaS, that's what they were doing. They were generating HTML with something like Hugo, microsegmented the website, but they're not using this yet. And they might, after watching this, they might just give it a try.
For that use case, this I think would just work. I wouldn't have any concerns with that at all, with all that code that's there.
So I guess we want to wrap things up. What's your sort of closing thought? And has anybody got a couple of questions? We probably get a couple in about Faasd or what Lucas has shown you.
I guess the last thought I would like to add is part of the reason I also designed it this way is I wanted to add as little bit of code as possible. I knew I had to add some code. And of course I have my function that's going to do whatever business logic. So I wanted to add as little bit of code as possible. So part of the design was, we have Nats connector. That's why I went with, is there something that turns the wall and connects to Nats? Can I hack on top of that? And I think one of the things that's really nice is if you do have MySQL, MariaDB, Mongo, any of these other databases, I think the pattern can definitely be adapted. And I think that all those databases have something that you can say is equivalent to the wall, and then some sort of API like logical replication that Postgres uses that you can connect to and do exactly the same. You can just plop in your database instead of Postgres in the diagram, and then put some replacement on top of wall listener, and then the rest of it kind of fits together. So I also kind of thought about like, how do I do this in a way that makes it pluggable, which is why like wall listener doesn't call a function directly or anything like that. I wanted to reuse kind of the ecosystem as much as possible.
Yeah.
So if you have alternatives, my point is you can do this too, right? You can fit this to whatever tools you're currently using.
There's somebody, Chris just asked if they're similar for MySQL, MariaDB, etc. And I think you mentioned that. Did you mention that in your post?
I think I mentioned it at the end of my post. So when I was doing the research, there's another project I looked at called Lapidus. I don't know where the name comes from, but it also supports Postgres, but then supports MariaDB, MySQL, and Mongo.
Okay.
So I wanted something I wanted something very small. Not saying that they're big, but when I found wall listener being in Go, it just, I don't know, for me, it just clicked and I was like, this is what I wanted. This is what I was looking for. But there's definitely other similar projects.
Cassiano is using something that read bin log and got JSON out of it. So yeah, it sounds like this is something I think people think it's useful. I certainly, I don't think I'm waiting for a use case, whereas sometimes that can be the case with this sort of thing. I think it's, let's see when a problem arises, does this a good fit? Is there something that we can do to kind of capture the imagination of the community, maybe as a follow-up post, something like a contentful style CMS where we got a little CRUD API. Everybody does a CRUD API, but nobody really has events and webhooks coming out of it. So
yeah,
definitely be pretty cool to see that. Did you have anything else you're going to do with this next? And do you want feedback on it?
Yeah, if anyone has any feedback, they run into any issues, then I'll definitely clean up the post or clean up the README. That the wall listener is definitely something I want to, like I mentioned, maybe tidy that up a little bit. Right now, I think it has Travis CI, but it doesn't have anything to like automate builds, like just a little cleaning the house so that it's, if something comes up and it needs to be improved, that it's easy to share again.
Okay. Thanks, Lucas. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this format. We'll be doing it again as long as we get people to join us and share what they've done. So if you've got a cool idea or a use case or something you want to chat about, come and chat to us in Slack, slack.openfaaS.io, and Lucas's blog is linked in the description below, lucasrosler.com. Is that right?
Yep.
Yep. And you can get us both on Twitter if you want to reach out to us that way too. All right.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. We will see you there. Thank you as well. It was good to have you here. And we will see you soon. Goodbye.